Hello, good day to everyone who's come along to listen for this really important update on the Neurodiversity in Business and Work study led by Birkbeck College, University of London. I'm delighted to be here with two professors who are leading the academic research, Professor Almuth and Professor Nancy, who will introduce themselves in a second. The one thing I wanted to do is just kind of get across a couple of key messages. The first one is we've had a fantastic response from our community so far. We need this to be the biggest and the most in-depth academic research that's ever taken place on neurodiversity in business. So it's imperative on all of us, I think, to be sharing this message and making sure that our voices in the community are heard. So please do fill in the survey, but importantly, take this out to your other ND colleagues and also your employer, because it's really important we have the employer voice. And then the second thing I'd say is that this is your opportunity. We all moan and we all kind of complain about our employers from time to time about what they're doing and what they're not doing in the ND space. I can tell you from the roadshows that we did last year at the end of our recent survey study, actually employees were desperate to hear from the professors in terms of what they had found, why they had found it. So this is your chance to actually influence change in your organization. So thanks for letting me give that brief background. I'll quickly pass to Almuth and Nancy to reintroduce themselves.
Thank you so much, Dan. So I am Almuth McDowall. I'm a professor of organizational psychology based in the School of Psychological Sciences at Birkbeck. And together with my best academic buddy, Nancy, I co-lead the Research Centre for Neurodiversity at Work, which is the UK's only research centre that is dedicated to this topic in the realm of work.
And I'm Nancy Doyle. I'm a visiting professor at Birkbeck in the School of Business and Management, actually, but also have worked with Almuth for over 10 years now, developing this research on neurodiversity in business. I'm also the founder of a non-profit company, which has been providing services in this area for nearly 15 years. And in my own career, I have been an assessor, a coach, a trainer, and a neurodivergent person, actually, for many, many, many years.
Great, thank you. So we've received a number of questions via social media and via email. So I wanted to run through those questions and just get your respective input on them. The first question or theme that we've received is about the evolution and the improvement in the study this year, which is allowing people to share different perspectives and switch perspectives during the study. So there was a natural kind of clarification topic around that. So I guess, Nancy, to you, from your perspective of looking at what employers do and ND individuals, how would you recommend people actually think about those different perspectives as they progress through the study?
People answering this questionnaire might well be answering from multiple perspectives, and we've tried to incorporate that this year. So if you're going through and it's asking about who you are and your demographics and your experience of being in the workplace, you can answer that as yourself from your own position. If the questions are about the policies and the practices that are enacted in your organisation, and you might be a policymaker in your organisation, you might be writing some of those policies and practices, then you can answer from the perspective of your organisation as a whole. And just to reassure people, it is entirely confidential, the survey. There is no way of identifying you or your organisation from the data that we collect. And the data that we collect won't be shared as individual lines by anybody. It will be aggregate summaries of what's been said in those numbers. So there's no way to bring risk or reputational damage to yourself or your organisation if you want to answer completely honestly. That's actually what we want to find out, because we have to understand where the improvements will come from, and we'll only get that by people giving honest reflections on their experiences.
Thanks, Nancy. And that actually answers the second question that I've personally received as well, which is from corporate members of NIB who were concerned about confidentiality. So thank you for reassuring us on that. The next query we've received has been around actually formal diagnosis, not required for the study. How does that impact? How do you take into account for that? I'd love to hear what your academic research approach is on that, please.
So thank you, Dan. When you first access the survey, there is an option to identify yourself either as a representative of an employer with responsibility for an interest in supporting neurodivergent workers. So this is what Nancy's answer referred to. Then the next option is to identify yourself as a neurodivergent worker who self-identifies or has a formal diagnosis. We never ask for the presence of a formal diagnosis because in none of our research we actually find that there's a difference between the people who self-identify or who've got a formal diagnosis in terms of the challenges they might experience, but also the wonderful strengths that they bring. Plus, we want to be really inclusive. We know how hard it is, particularly for adult professionals in certain areas of England and Scotland, Wales in particular, to have access to a diagnosis. So no, you do not need a formal diagnosis to participate. It is perfectly sufficient if you self-identify.
Right, I know that will assuage a lot of people's concerns in that space, so that's really great to hear. The final query that I know that we've been receiving has been around the recently introduced terminology of colleagues. What are you trying to achieve in terms of surveying their experiences? And can you clarify for us how they should be answering, and do they need to work with ND colleagues?
So good question, Dan. So absolutely, we want to hear from colleagues, because if there is one resounding and very consistent finding from the psychological literature, it's about this importance of the support that we receive from the colleagues around us, but also from our leaders. So more is always better. So we want to bring in that perspective. We also want to make sure that the colleagues who are responding to the survey are working with at least one individual whom they know identifies as neurodivergent. So again, they do not have to have a formal diagnosis, but they might have talked about how they self-identify, and that is good enough for our purposes.
Right. Excellent. Well, look, thank you for so thoroughly answering, both of you, these questions and queries we've been receiving. I guess, open to any final messages that you want to pass on to potential respondents or people who've already kindly invested their time.
Yeah, I've got a comment actually, and it's striking me answering these questions. In my practice and just generally, I think in the world, there's so much goodwill. So what we find when I'm doing training is that colleagues are curious, they're interested, they're accepting, employers are curious, invested, want to do this well. What's lacking is how. So I don't think we have an attitude problem to the same degree that we did 10, 15 years ago in the neurodiversity or even the wider disability space. I think attitudes have come a long way. But a lot of the literature that's out there and the advice that people can get hold of is very anecdotal. It's kind of quite surface. It tells stories without really explaining in detail what the difficulties might be, what the opportunities might be, and how we structure teams, feedback, appraisals. How do we create cultures of psychological safety? Those are easy words to use, but people need practical advice. And that's what we're aiming to get out of this study, is to be able to give very clear, practical actions that employers, colleagues, and neurodivergent people themselves can take to experience better inclusion in the workplace.
What a wonderful message to reinforce. Thank you, Nancy. And I guess if I would reinforce one additional message is that we want to hear from all communities. With my research hat on, I'm so very aware that at the moment in academic research, almost nobody is looking at dyslexia, for instance. Research funding is almost impossible to come by. At the moment, all efforts are concentrated on autistic communities. And of course, research needs to be done and attention needs to be given, but we do need to be inclusive. One really stark finding from our last research was that people were far more likely to report multiple conditions than one condition alone. So my big message is we want to be really inclusive. All of your voices count. So please respond to our survey.
Thank you, Almuth. Thank you, Nancy. It's been a pleasure talking to you again. And final message to our community is please do get behind this academic research, first of its kind, and we really think we can make change across the corporate world.